Hi friends, and welcome back to another video. Recently I had a subscriber email me and ask for the difference between cheap and expensive perfume. Today I'm going to break down a concept in fragrance of smelling cheap and what does that really mean in perfumery. There is so much nuance that needs to be added to this, but in a world where fragrances and niche fragrances seem to get more and more expensive by the minute, and dupes are all over, and some of them are amazing and some of them are absolutely horrible, it's interesting to break apart the concept of what makes a fragrance smell expensive, what makes a fragrance smell cheap. And since I am a perfumery student, I can give you a bit of context to this. To add some background as well, I made a video a few months ago about some mistakes I made getting into fragrance. And one thing that I said was that you don't need to spend a lot of money to smell expensive. And I discussed how I've gotten compliments from body washes, I've gotten compliments from shampoos. And then another mistake that I made that I talked about is don't have unrealistic expectations when you blind buy certain affordable dupes, etc. And a lot of people were like, what do you mean? Like, I thought that you think that you don't need to spend a lot of money to smell good. And that is 100% true. However, although there are so many fragrances that can be amazing and smell so good and be enjoyable and pleasant at an affordable price point, I also understand that there is such thing as fragrance smelling cheap. It is subjective, and it's a word that's kind of like, what does that really mean? So in this video, I want to kind of discuss what that really means to help navigate the fragrance space. Before I get into the video, one thing I wanted to address was the question of saying, what gives a fragrance value? Like, what is a quality fragrance? And my answer to that is, do you like it? I don't care if the fragrance is $20, $30, $1,000. It is not of value if you do not like it. There is no need whatsoever to ever purchase something that you do not like the smell of. It can have the most rare orris butter that has been aged for 14 years and has all of the most exquisite markers of quality, but if you do not like how it smells, it is not worth the money for you. It's just like watches. There are some really ugly watches that have heritage craftsmanship, the most amazing mechanisms internally, automatic movement, and yet you cannot make me spend the money on that because it is ugly and I don't want to wear it. Same thing with fragrances. Fragrances can be of quality, however, that doesn't mean that it is valuable to you. So that is my overarching opinion, and it goes for affordable fragrances, it goes for expensive fragrances. I don't care how much your fragrance costs as long as you like it. And that is what I get at with my video on mistakes that I made. And that's the point, is like, there can be fragrances that smell so good that are super affordable. But in that under $50 price point, there is a variation between fragrances that smell good and fragrances that smell cheap. And when you're blind buying things, you don't know that. So my point was just to be extra conscious, because I know that when you see a fragrance recommended and it's $20, I press add to cart and purchase like pretty much immediately. And the mistake I made is, hey, some of them are not as good as others. And so the point of this video is to say, why aren't they as good? What are these elements that make things smell cheap, or that we have these associations with? Like, really, what's going on there? Because what does that mean? Even I wonder, what does that mean? Like, when the fragrances that I think smell cheap, I don't know for certain that they smell cheap to everyone else. And what does cheap really mean? Like, how does something smell cheap? So in this video, I wanted to kind of address that and discuss kind of value in fragrances. Now, this video will be a little bit meandering because I'm trying to tie together so many different concepts, and with my channel, nuance is so critical, and I've tried to organize my thoughts here into automatic digestible chapters that you can click through, but nuance is so essential to this conversation that if you do click through it, I just hope that you get the message, essentially. So please buckle down, grab a drink, do a puzzle while you watch this video. That's what I do when I watch YouTube. And, you know, pay attention, because there will be a test at the end. The first question that my follower asked me was, what should customers look out for in fragrance to know if it is worth the price? And like I said, do you like it or not? This is where blind buying becomes very dangerous. Bianco Latte, so viral, so popular. I really like this fragrance, and I had a video that blew up, and a lot of people have bought this because of me. And even though it's from Italy and it has amazing reviews and it's a niche fragrance and it has quality materials, it's not going to be worth the price for someone who does not like how it smells. Now, to entertain the question in terms of, what should customers look out for to know if it's worth the price, I think that people want an answer straightforward, like, concentration, how long it lasts. And those are things that people look at, like how long a fragrance lasts, to assess quality when it's not necessarily indicative of quality. And I'm going to break this down a little bit later because, if longevity is the most important thing to you, that can 100% inform your purchasing habits. However, that is not an inherent indicator of quality. You can watch my other videos on Perfume 101 to discuss more about longevity and kind of what that really means, to kind of separate the relationship between quality and longevity, because it's not linear. The second question that she asked was, can you give a specific example of a cheap perfume that is good quality versus expensive perfume that is poor quality? Have you ever seen those HGTV shows where people hire an interior designer to redo their house, and they'll say, okay, I'm willing to pay $40,000 for you to redo my kitchen, bathroom, etc. I'll give you $40,000 to renovate my house. And then you have the interior designer who comes up with the home renovations. So imagine a perfume bottle as a renovated home, and imagine the perfumer as the interior designer. Kayali gave the perfume house a budget to say, hey, this is the budget, make us a perfume. And they made this. When the maker made this fragrance, they went to the fragrance house, said, this is the budget we have, make us a fragrance. When Amouage went to Givaudan and made this fragrance, they said, hey, this is our budget for the formula. Then Quentin Bish was like the interior designer and he whipped up this. So perfumers are hired for a service and they do their best based on the budget that they are given. And this is one thing that really pissed me off. I got a comment a while ago that said Quentin Bish sold out because he worked on cheaper fragrances. You guys, every client has a different budget. So when a perfumer is making a fragrance, they are doing the best they can given their budget. And on an expensive fragrance formula, the perfumer has more leeway. They don't have as many boundaries because they can formulate whatever they want to make something that is close to the brief. So for example, say that they said, we want something with hazelnut that's like feminine, and Quentin Bish can think, okay, perfect. And he can use whatever he wants. When he uses his hazelnut accord, some of the ones that I've smelled in perfumery school have really weird off notes where it smells like hazelnut, but then there's this really weird side off note. So any skilled perfumer can use a raw material knowing, okay, this has off notes, and so I need to use these other notes to counteract those off notes to make it rounded and to make it smell truer. Or you can use a certain raw material and think, okay, this raw material exists, but I need to make it more complex. When they have a larger budget, they can really explore to the greatest of their abilities. For something like this, the perfumer would have restrictions because this fragrance is not going to cost hundreds of dollars. This fragrance costs, $38? We can deduce that there were restrictions for the price for something like this. And so because of that, sometimes with the more affordable fragrances, when people think this smells cheap, sometimes there can be notes that smell a little off or a little flat or a little one-dimensional. And it's because if a perfumer is working within a budget, you're doing your best within cost restrictions. And so sometimes the fragrance can be a little one-dimensional or a little flat and not have the full photorealistic effect that you would get if the perfumer were shooting for something like that. Now, another difference between more expensive and cheaper fragrances is the fact that a lot of more affordable fragrances are meant to be more mass market. And so there can actually be a difference in palatability between the more expensive and the cheaper fragrances. For example, Guidance by Amouage, there's a really woody, peppery scent. There's a little bit of a reminiscent to human bodies. And when it comes to fragrances that are meant to be photorealistic or meant to have depth, generally you have to add things that don't smell good in order to provide contrast. There's one note in fragrance school that's called scatol, and it smells horrible. It's found in fecal matter and other things, and it smells very, very bad. However, it is important to have these tools of fragrance notes that don't smell good so if you're an artist painting a canvas, the highlights become more bright when you add shadows. And so it's the same thing. You can use these notes that are a little off or a little different to add kind of body and contrast. And so when it comes to what makes more expensive fragrances smell more realistic than cheaper fragrances. And it can be the fact that when you have a larger budget to make complexities of what comes from nature, they can really carve out the different facets to create the most beautiful accords. And not even necessarily the most beautiful, because it's just that they're generally opting for something that seems more expensive or exclusive. So they want something that's more layered or complex. Because why would you ever spend more money for a fragrance when you can just pick something off the shelf that'll smell good? The reason that you're buying something more expensive is because you're thinking it's more exclusive, or, only certain people would have this. This would only appeal to certain people with certain taste. So sometimes there's actually less palatable elements because the customer they're marketing toward is different from mass market. Because if your fragrance is going to cost like $15, then in order to make profit, you're expecting that you're going to sell more. And so you want to make something that's really palatable, that a lot of people will like. It's supposed to be like an easy entry point that'll be accessible to a lot of people. So a lot of the times fragrances that some people think might smell cheap is because it actually smells like more palatable. So there's two sides of the coin. One is kind of this palatability or easiness or likability with lower cost fragrances that some people might read as cheap, but I think that's actually a good thing. And then also at the same time, there can be a one-dimensionality of these fragrances because the niche fragrances generally will carve out the notes a little more to have kind of more nuance and complexity. For example, Carnal Flower by Frederic Malle has some weird off notes. Overall is kind of well regarded as one of the best, most realistic tuberose scents because the perfumer is artfully crafting to the highest of his ability. I don't know the budget for any of these projects. I don't have access to the numbers, but just assuming that he has more leeway to use whatever he wants in his palette, as opposed to if he were working on a cost-restricted project. For products that have smaller budgets, it might be trying to please a larger audience, and so they might not have the contrast notes. And also, perfumers are being creatively directed by the brands that they're being hired by. So there's absolutely cases where perfumers are hired and they just say, okay, do your thing. But for the most part, when a brand wants to come out with a fragrance, they approach a perfumer and they tell them, hey, this is our concept for the fragrance. And the perfumer does their best to create that concept. So conversely, what makes something smell expensive? There's a few different things that we have here. There's three pillars. One is the blend, two are your associations with certain smells, and three is the raw materials. And I think that a lot of people like to think, okay, something smells expensive because it has naturals or because it has more expensive raw materials. And that is not inherently true. It is not necessarily untrue. However, the point of this video, as it is with pretty much all the videos on my channel, is to really break apart statements so you can understand complexity beyond certain statements. For one, let's talk about the blend. There are so many different raw materials in a perfumer's palette. Some natural, some synthetic. I have had certain notes ruined for me because I've smelled them in isolation and think, oh, there's something about this that I find really unpleasant. For example, hazelnut, I've smelled some hazelnut notes, and in isolation, there's some really bizarre off notes. And so it comes to the perfumer's skill to be able to blend, to counteract the notes. And perfumers also know what notes go with one another and also how to make fragrances blend from the top to the middle to the base to make it an experience that is cohesive, that tells a story, and that is beautiful the whole way through. I think we all have experiences where fragrances smell great at the beginning and then the dry down is bad, or they smell bad at the beginning and then the dry down is beautiful. So it comes to the perfumer's ability and the skill to create fragrance that has a good blend. On more affordable projects, it can be more difficult to achieve a perfect blend because your hands are tied. So perfumers do their best. I'm going to show you some examples from body washes. These are two of my favorite body washes. This is the Athena Club Golden Vanilla. It is a vanilla scent. And then this is the Cyclar Vanilla Verve body wash. This one is like $40, this one is like $10. Both of these are some of my favorite vanilla scents. However, I can tell that this one smells more expensive than this one, and that is because this smells like vanilla and body lotion. And you know how body lotion has like a smell. Like sometimes body wash or body lotion has like a lotion smell. This is like vanilla mixed with lotion smell. Whereas this here is super fully blended. The actual product is masked seamlessly. It just smells like pure vanilla. The overall aroma effect is just that vanilla. So there's more clarity of the scent that one would hope for a higher price point. That doesn't mean that this is not amazing and this can't smell amazing and this can't get me compliments and it can't be one of my favorite products. It's just saying if there was no difference between a price and quality, no one would ever buy expensive stuff. So I think it should be reassuring that when you spend a little more, you can get a different sensory experience. So that is kind of the explanation there. To talk about two fragrances that are at different price points that both have great blends, I have Elizabeth Arden's green tea. I'm holding up a flanker because it's what I have. And then we have Armani Privé's Thé Oolong. These are two of my favorite green tea scents. This one is like, you can get it for like $15 online. And then we have Thé Oolong, which is what, $170 or something. This fragrance is beautiful, wonderful, fresh, spa-like, gorgeous. And so is this fragrance. Beautiful, wonderful, fresh, spa-like, gorgeous. There's a beautiful blend in this fragrance. And when you have a really skilled perfumer like Francis Kurkdjian, he can make a fragrance smell so expensive that is not at an expensive price point. However, you cannot deny the fact that this is a beautiful bottle with luxury qualities. There's literally gold suspended in it. And this one is okay. It has a plastic cap and the atomizer is like this. And so sometimes our perceptions of a product can be influenced by its packaging. Say that the formulas were the same price for both of these. I don't know that they're not. I don't know the financials of either of these brands. The Thé Oolong probably spent more money on their bottle, as this is a thicker glass. I mean, this is probably a custom cap, suspended glitter inside. These are all custom components and it's pretty heavy, which makes it feel like a luxurious experience. Whereas something like this, it's not very heavy. The atomizer is not as fancy. It's a plastic cap. Even if they're saving money on the packaging and they're spending the same amount on their fragrance formula, people can still think something smells cheap just because they perceive it based on the bottle to be that way. So sometimes we think something smells cheap and it has nothing to do with the fragrance itself, but purely just our perception of the fragrance based on the packaging or the marketing. Okay, now the second pillar of why something might smell cheap or expensive has to do with our association. So like I mentioned, people might associate this bottle with looking cheap, and so they think the fragrance smells cheap because of some kind of bias or perception. For me, Eat and Juicy Apple, I think smells cheap because to me, this smells a lot like Winter Candy Apple from Bath & Body Works. And that fragrance is like $10, $15. And so when I smell something like this, I think I could smell just like this if I spent $15. And so I think this smells like the DNA of something that could be much more affordable. So why would I spend the amount that this costs? And I do find that people tend to associate fragrances with fruity notes as smelling cheap more often than other scent profiles. And that is to do with the fact that a lot of fruity citrus scents are found in hygiene products. So any dish soap, hand soap, laundry detergent you have, there's a perfumer behind it. And when it comes to dish soap, hand soap, laundry detergent, you can tell that you've cleaned something if it smells. Like if you use wipes to wipe up your bathroom and then you walk in and it smells like that kind of lemony Clorox smell, you know, okay, it's clean, like I've cleaned it. For the most part, people are just buying these products because they need to use the products. Like you're buying Clorox wipes because you need to clean something. So the brand that makes these products, they want something that is going to be the most palatable scent that is associated with cleanliness to people. So for a Lysol product, again, how much do these cost? Maybe $3, $5. One can assume that they are not spending $4 out of that per bottle on fragrance. They're probably spending as little as possible for something that just kind of covers the scent of whatever active chemicals they have to give a scent that is pleasant. So even though I don't have the financials of how much Lysol is paying for their fragrance formulas for every thing of wipes, I can assume that it's not a lot. I can assume that it's less than a niche project. I don't know this, I'm speculating here. A lot of our perceptions of cheap scents have to do with cheap products. And a lot of cheap products are scented in a specific way, like a Lysol or a hand wash or a shampoo or a laundry detergent. If you evaluate the fragrance profiles of a lot of functional care products, you'll find kind of the same profiles. And this does vary culturally. For example, when I moved to France, I see that they have a lot of like floral scents for hand soap and stuff like that. But growing up in North America, I find that my dish soap is usually green apple. Any shampoo, go through the shampoo aisle, smell every shampoo, they're all fruity scented. Unless it's like a curly hair shampoo or a nutrition hair mask, then it'll usually have like a coconut scent or maybe a shea butter to kind of illustrate hydration, but most of the time it's a fruity scent. And so when it comes to fruity scents in particular, and this is my opinion, fruity scents, citrus scents, these are what we are primed with to perceive something as smelling clean. Because hand soaps, shampoos, etc., oftentimes in North America at least, are fruity. And fruits cannot be extracted naturally. We don't have a lot of molecules to create these scents. I mean, it really depends from fruit to fruit. Like a lot of fruity notes, we really only have so many things to make the scent. And so they can feel a little more one-dimensional. And so I find personally that sometimes really expensive fruity scents, again, it depends on the fruit, but a fragrance that is meant to smell like a peach can have really similar olfactive profiles regardless of the price of the final product, because we only have so many products that smell like that. And going back to your Lysol wipes, when you have a functional product, like they just want something that is going to be pleasant and something that is not going to be super expensive, because the final product at the end of the day, they want it to be on the shelves, they want it to be available in mass so a lot of people can buy them. They don't want fragrance to be the reason that someone doesn't buy a product. So when it comes to your Lysol wipes, they want a scent that's like just likable enough and can exist in a difficult chemical environment and is not going to be a deal breaker for everyone. And they want something that people will smell and think, okay, clean. And so if you look at the market, there are certain scent profiles that are used to inform consumer perceptions of a product. And so for one, since a lot of these functional care products are not super fine fragrances and they can sometimes have that flat one-dimensional smell that has kind of an underlying scent of whatever the actual product is, like an underlying Lysol wipe smell, or for example like this, an underlying just body lotion formula smell. When it comes to these fragrances that don't have a full perfect blend, that can be where people think, okay, this smells cheap, is because it smells one-dimensional, etc. Or when it comes to fragrances that have overlapping profiles between functional products like hand soap or, cleaning products. A lot of people, when it comes to citrus fragrances, even if they're super, super expensive, they'll just say, this smells like Windex, this smells cheap, because they associate citrus with cleaning products. And even if they use the most expensive products and it's blended beautifully and, whatever, still at the end of the day, these associations bring us back to the perception of cheap versus expensive. And the reason why this is not a standard and this is just an association is because there's cultural differences here. I discussed citrus for cleaning products in North America, as that's kind of what I've been around. But when I moved to France, they had raspberry dish soap. And I was like, I don't think I see raspberry dish soap around here. And when I got this all-purpose cleaner for my house, it was pine scented. And I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if I usually see pine scented cleaning products. I guess there's Pine Sol. Anyway, it really depends on what you've used, because again, my associations have to do with what I've used. If you tell me that something smells like shampoo, it depends on what you use, because if you're using like a coconut scented shampoo for, curly hair that's supposed to be hydrating, but if I've never ever used a nourishing shampoo that's scented like coconut, we would be speaking a different language. And so your associations with shampoo are different from mine. This association is a cultural thing and it is personal, and that is why when someone says something smells cheap, there's so much variation here. Now, the third pillar that I have are the raw materials. And the reason I leave this for last is because a lot of people like to think that something smelling cheap is purely a raw materials thing and that expensive raw materials have to do with quality. And coming from someone who has smelled over 600 raw materials and who is in one of the most prestigious schools for perfumery, I can tell you that I'm using my words very particularly here so as not to be misunderstood. There is no olfactive tell in raw materials that is standard to denote price. Before I discussed how there can be olfactive tells and olfactive signifiers for the overall fragrance. But if you are zooming in and you just have a bunch of different raw materials, if I were to have you smell all of them, and guess the price based on the scent. There is no particular scent or quality that you can look for that is standard across raw materials. There are olfactive signifiers of quality for raw materials, but what you would look for in a orris to signify a more expensive orris versus a less expensive orris is different from the differences between different honey synthetics. Thinking of expensive raw materials, materials can be super expensive that are synthetics, and materials can be super expensive that are naturals. Just because something has naturals doesn't mean that it's inherently more expensive or is more expensive than a synthetic. For example, iris is a very expensive note. Generally, you take the rhizomes or roots of the iris flower and you have them for about 7 years in the soil, and then you harvest them and then you keep them for 7 years and to develop the ionones. So if you have a 14-year aged orris butter, that is obviously going to be more expensive than just any particular synthetic ionone on itself. But if I had no knowledge of the industry whatsoever, take away all context and all knowledge, and I were to just smell iris concrete, I wouldn't think it smells expensive. It kind of smells like carrot, it's a little powdery, it's very complex, but I would argue that there's nothing, if you eliminate all context and you had no knowledge and just gave someone a smell and asked, does this smell expensive? They would probably just answer by whether or not they like it. So even though there are markers of price olfactively based on where you're sourcing your jasmine or what time of year it's harvest, there's different olfactive profiles that can denote price or value. Doesn't mean that they smell good or better. So something being more quality doesn't immediately assign it palatability for the average user or for everyone. But, obviously fragrance notes that are more expensive, or the reason that we want to source from certain places or certain times of year, can be because of the olfactive profiles and because they smell better to more people. So it's not that that's not the case, but there's more that goes into it. And for naturals too, there's some fragrance, like sometimes we'll have a year where the soil's not very good and we'll hardly get any jasmine. So suddenly the jasmine is super, super expensive, but it doesn't smell better that year. It's just costs more, because that's just how the climate works. So there's so much more that goes into price than quality. And the point of this video is to give you all of the information so you can think critically. These are things that are trained through context, through knowledge about the industry. So taking a step back, and when we disconnect from any actual background understanding of fragrance, smells are just smells, and just because something is expensive doesn't mean you will like it. And to go back to talking about a perfumer, how they're working at a certain budget, certain naturals can have different qualities based on, is it a distillation? Is it a carbon dioxide extract? What country is it from? What are the soil conditions? What was the yield that year? That can all change the actual price of the product. Versus there are different prices in synthetics, and synthetics can get so expensive as well. So for example, if you want to make a honey note, you can use honey F, or you can use phenylethyl phenyl acetate. Phenylethyl phenyl acetate is a lot cheaper, but it has more of like a hyacinth pollen smell that can be kind of strong and powdery. And so for like a floral composition that you want to add a honey note, phenylethyl phenyl acetate might be a really good option, because honey F has its own off notes. Like sometimes smells a little bit like gasoline to me. And so if you're a perfumer and you're working on a project that costs a little less, you might have to use the products that are a little more affordable, and they might just have different nuances that you're not going for. But if I were to just give someone honey F and phenylethyl phenyl acetate and to say, which one is more expensive? They don't necessarily know, because the price comes from the supply chain, etc., not necessarily how true the note is. That's all I have to say for now, so I'm going to end this video here. I do have more that I'd like to say, so I might jump in with a little bit more information or context if needed. Last week's video, I spent so much time editing and putting in all these overlays for you, so this week I just kind of wanted a video that was more science-based and more just kind of sitting down and explaining a question that a lot of people have. So there's still so much nuance to this conversation, but I tried to kind of steer my explanation to kind of keep it in one track. So there's a few other things that I would like to make further videos on. So if you have any questions that came from this video that you'd like me to expand upon, definitely let me know. I'll respond to your comments below. You can also follow me on Instagram. I tend to give a lot of videos about science, etc. So follow me there, and thank you so much for watching another video, and I'll see you in the next one.